You're listening to Dodge Movie Podcast. Your hosts are Christy and Mike Dodge, the founders of Dodge Media Productions. We produce films and podcasts, so this is a podcast about films. Join them as they share their passion for filmmaking.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Dodge Movie Podcast, where we are kicking off this month of March talking about, we're calling it Christie's Classics. And they are the primarily black and white films, but some of the films that I fondly remember watching when I first started film school back in 2014.
That sounds like a long time ago.
It feels like a long time ago, right?
I bet, yeah.
All right, this week we are going to be talking about the 1946 film My Darling Clementine, directed by John Ford, starring Henry Fonda, Linda Darnell, and Victor Mature. Mature?
Yeah, I don't know how to say that. I've always heard it said Victor Mature, but I don't know how he said it. Mature? Who knows?
Right. He was an attractive fellow, I thought.
He was. I think he was a leading man in other films,
yes, right? Yes. He could curl my toes. Right? The film takes place in 1882. Some of the filming locations are the famous Monument Valley that John Ford loved filming in Utah, Devon's Tower National Monument in Wyoming, Moab in Arizona, Shiprock in New Mexico. So all over the Southwest. Its writer is Samuel G. Engel and Winston Miller, and it's a 20th Century Fox film. The synopsis for this film is after their cattle are stolen and their brother is murdered, the Earp brothers have to settle the score with the Clanton family. The taglines are, "The Roaring West at its reckless best." It's a nice little rhyming tagline.
Say that quickly.
Right. And the other one is reckless, righteous, frontier adventure.
So did we have a different tolerance for clan warfare? I mean, it seems like Hatfield and McCoys, Earps and Clantons, there were a lot of feuds in that era.
Yes. Well, life was rough. And so you probably were pissed off all the time. And so you took it out on the family over there.
Yeah, those weirdos.
Yeah. So I found this interesting in reading some of the trivia. John Ford actually met Wyatt Earp, which, first of all, I think I was probably an adult when I realized Wyatt Earp wasn't just a fictitious character.
Well, some people would argue that the Wyatt Earp we know is a fictitious character invented by the real Wyatt Earp.
And so John Ford was on a set with Mr. Earp, and he told him about this shootout at the OK Corral. And it's depicted different in this film. And I loved it because I was watching some videos in preparation for this. And I think it was that Mankiewicz fella that loves to talk movie trivia. When somebody said, "Mr. Ford, why did you do it differently than Wyatt told you it happened?" And he goes, "Did you enjoy the movie?" And the critic said, "Yes." And he goes, "Well, then what's the problem?"
Yeah, I actually think in most likelihood, none of the cinematic depictions of it were accurate.
Right.
Just my guess. I could be wrong, but I'm thinking they all were much more zhuzhed up.
Yes, yes. So Henry Fonda was Ford's first pick to play Wyatt Earp, and Vincent Price was considered for the role of Doc Holliday.
Which is interesting. I don't know if at that time he was in the horror film genre, but that's what I know Vincent Price from.
Right, right.
So it seems an odd cast.
Yeah, although the Doc Holliday is, I mean, I think Victor did a much better job than like a Vincent Price, but he is kind of a little bit of a villain. So maybe that's why they were thinking Vincent Price.
And Tombstone, is that Val Kilmer that did Doc Holliday?
I believe so, yes. And so this was Henry Fonda's first production after returning from World War II from the Navy.
Well, if it came out in 46, there couldn't be much time between when he was cashiered from the Navy and when they made this film.
Right.
So, that again, we've talked about this in another review, but it's hard for us maybe to really understand what it would have been like. And then I think, imagine if a person who had been in maybe ground combat, then shooting those scenes where people are firing guns, would that also be triggering a la Audie Murphy, right? So,
but I think that, and we're going to talk about it a little bit later, but the scene where Wyatt Earp walks Clementine down to the church, and I know that they said in film school that the two flags that are, perfectly waving like a good patriotic flag should do, was very important for the time because it was that
Sure.
patriotism and, we kicked ass. So I loved this tidbit too that I shared with you. Because of its optimism and simple idealism, John Ford thought this was a good film for children.
Yeah, not exactly sure about that.
Yeah, I don't know if I would agree with him. So Mike, kick us off. What was the pickup line for My Darling Clementine?
Well, I'm not exactly sure. We listened to this 3 times, and I think somebody says Texas, and the other person says steers. So I'm not real sure what was said.
Was it the Clantons or was it
was
the
the
Earps?
Clantons. It was Old Man Clanton and one of the others. And I think Old Man Clanton is the one that says Texas and somebody else says steers. And I actually am going to say I had problems with the sound in this film throughout the whole film.
You also had problems with the lighting.
Yeah, the film was very, very dark. I don't mean that in the sense of tone. I mean that visually it was... And I don't think it was underexposed. It looked like it was underlit on purpose.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it was hard for me to kind of know what was going on sometimes.
I think mostly the nighttime scenes and the interior scenes, right? Because I'm thinking the daytime scenes, like...
Yeah. I'm thinking of the actual gunfight portion was suitably lit. But yeah, there was some of that. I did wonder if they did some of that on soundstage, some of the exteriors at night, because like, for example, at the Chuck Wagon when it was raining, it looked to me like maybe that was on a soundstage. And so perhaps at that time they didn't have any light bulbs. They'd used them all up against the Nazis. So who knows?
So the film opens up with, like you said, the Clantons eyeing the steers of the Earps. And there's 4 brothers that come just outside the town of Tombstone. And they're just going to kind of settle for a bit. And they're moving the steers to, was it California or Arizona?
I forget where the steers were supposed to go.
Yeah, they're moving through town, though.
And Old Man Clanton's herd, I think, was where they were going.
Well, that's where they ended up.
Yeah.
Spoiler alert.
What?
And so, unfortunately, Wyatt goes into town with his brothers, and there's some rough business with a Native American.
Yes, Injun Charlie.
Yeah, he doesn't bode so well.
Well, and the representation of that, I have to say, I sign up with the Native tribes if they're upset with this, because he was portrayed as being drunk.
Yep.
And violent.
Yeah.
And the problem I have with that is all of the other cowboys seem to be just as drunk and violent, but Injun Charlie needed a whooping.
Yeah. He got a kick in the tush.
Yeah, and that was better than maybe what he would have got if Wyatt Earp wasn't involved. Wyatt was the kinder person.
He basically, didn't he knock him out and then drag him by his feet? So it caused him at least a mild concussion, if not.
Right. Now, that's implied head trauma. We did not see it happen. It happened off screen, which, again, works out real well because then you don't have to get Henry Fonda in a fight with a stuntman. So that was clever direction.
Right. So while they're in town, kind of getting a shave and a meal, their poor brother, younger brother James, is left with the herd. And we don't know it at the time, but the Clantons basically shot him and steal all the cattle. And I just have a quick note here. The West was harsh because before they go into Tombstone, they have a meal out at the campsite. And I loved it because at the end, they took their metal plates and just picked up a pile of dirt and rubbed it on the plate and like gave it back to the cookie.
Well, I do notice that. And what I was thinking is, wouldn't you maybe lick the plate clean first?
Wouldn't that be better than some dirt?
That's because I'm thinking of the next meal. So
exactly. I don't want grit on my food.
Especially if you get the same plate back. Right.
Oh, I didn't even think of that. So maybe that's why you don't lick it.
Oh, geez. Of all the things that cowboys are exposed to, I think
Each
another
other's
cowboy's
spit.
saliva. Now, Willie Nelson has a great song about this. Cowboys are secretly fond of each other. But anyway, I did notice that as well. So I thought, but is that also not a reason to have a dog?
I was just going to say, give it to the dog. Let the dog lick it clean.
That's what I did as a kid. Also, it was interesting. There's the scene where the youngest brother, I think James is his name.
James is, yes.
He has this kind of Celtic cross style pendant. And the IMDb trivia says it was about $750 in, the money of the time that the person wrote the comment. And they thought that was excessive. And I disagree. I think given the rules of Westerns, cowboys love their ladies. And I could see him saving up all his money because he wanted to impress a lady with the really cool silver necklace.
Yeah, in
thing.
the film they say it was $25, and so they said that if that was today, it'd be $760 or something like that.
Yeah, something. It was expensive, but I could buy that.
And like you always say, if you see a Celtic cross in the first act, it's gonna come up later.
Yeah,
and it does.
Really, it does.
It looks like it has a sturdy chain on it, but when Wyatt rips it off Chihuahua's neck,
right,
that looks painful.
So speaking, though, of the cross, it does bring us to an interesting point that I paused the film and I noticed something that is in the IMDb trivia, that they use the Spanish word chingadera.
Oh, that's right.
And
yeah, we had a conversation about this.
The reason that this is, that I noticed it so much, and this is worth commentary, is when I was growing up, an individual who also, like standards and practices of that time, did not know what that word meant, would use that word all the time for a small thing that you didn't know what it was. You didn't know the name for it, like thingamajig.
You would use that?
Well, this person used it, and so I picked it up.
Okay.
So
you just said it will. So you know exactly who taught you that word.
I do, but I don't want to reference
No, it's
them.
fine. It's fine.
And I used it willy-nilly for decades. And it was not until very late in my life, I'm embarrassed to say, that I actually stopped and put together that I know what the root verb of that word is. And it was actually a word that I didn't think I was saying. And I then thought back over the years of all the native Spanish speakers who probably thought I was a foul-mouthed little cuss. But I didn't know any better. I was just taught that word.
So when we heard it in the movie, we both just mouths dropped open and we looked at each other. Because you've heard it, we were watching Carlos Mencia or something, and you heard it in something else. And actually, was it a movie that we covered on the podcast? Anyway, I remember us talking about it, that when you heard it, you were like, oh my gosh, do you know what that means? I can't believe it got, because it was aired on broadcast television.
Right.
And you were stunned.
I do know that the Carlos Mencia show was full of those swear words, and I was stunned that they got past the censors. So apparently people who speak Spanish can tolerate cuss words better than English speakers, I guess. But I thought that was an interesting thing. And I don't know.
Well, it's commented on in the trivia, and it says basically standards and practices caught it. Oh, because this was, I believe this movie did not get a rating, but it got what they call, it passed. So this was before the ratings, and you basically had to submit your movie to the Hayes board, and they would decide if it passed or not, or you would have to change it. And they let them leave it in because they said that the Anglo audience wouldn't know what it meant. So were Hispanic people not going to the movies?
Well, or are they not Karens?
In 1946?
I know.
I would think that.
Or did they not care what the Latino community thought?
Oh, we didn't have to protect the ears.
Right. They're like, we don't care.
Well, that's funny in hindsight, considering Ford intended or thought that this was a good film for children.
Right.
So the poor Mexican children would know.
But I'm going to come back to, how did it get in there in the first place? Because in order to know that word, the person would have to be a Spanish speaker. And unless they're an idiot like me, they would know that it was
right. But we've already covered that maybe Ford or the writer weren't culturally sensitive. So
I guess. I just thought they wouldn't even know the word in the first place.
Right.
But that's an interesting diversion, because when you look back at that era, they have a lot of things like, Tarnation and Dad Blasted,
yes,
where it's my understanding
very G-rated.
That those things were created after the fact for movies, that in reality in 1882, they used all the swear words we know, right?
Right.
It's the English language. It's consistent.
Yeah.
And it was only for the movies that they came up with the Yosemite Sam version.
Yeah. So what did you think of the storytelling and the conflict building that right off the bat, James is killed? And so now that launches us into a natural vengeance of the Earp brothers. And I think it was when they're dealing with Injun Charlie, as I so inappropriately parody of them, the sheriff turns in his badge. He's like, I can't take this. And so he turns in his badge. So Tombstone technically doesn't have a sheriff. And so I think it's before they find out about their brother, but maybe it's after Wyatt says, I want to be sheriff.
I believe it's after. So this is, again, I mentioned earlier this feud. It's a very common motif in Westerns, but maybe it wasn't that time. We kind of know as the audience, because of the trope, that when James doesn't make it, that this is setting up a violent confrontation. Right.
It is after. I just found in my notes.
And to me, this is good storytelling because there is an inevitability to it, that we don't ever think, well, maybe this will just, that from the very start, again, by the premise, by the bit, that from the moment we see the Clantons, they've got their eye on the Earp's cattle. And once we buy that, then the rest of the film is kind of inevitable, right? Which, when you back it up a bit and think, well, why would the Clantons want to tackle with the Earps when one of the townspeople says something to him like, oh, aren't you Wyatt Earp from You Cleaned Up Kansas City or something? So to me, we all skip over that, but that's an important thing. Why would the Clantons pick a fight with a guy who has that rep and 3 brothers with him?
Right. And then why wouldn't the Earps just say, well, I guess they want to get their cattle back? Because I was going to say, why wouldn't they just take their cattle and leave? But then that's when I realized.
This is another thing that I don't understand cowboying well enough. That when you mix the herd, how easy is it to get yours back? Do you have to basically look at them one at a time?
Right, especially back then. Well, that's what branding was, right?
It was for it. So, but it seems to me that you would then have to somehow get them all in one spot and then one at a time pull it out and say, Clanton, Earp, you know?
That's what James was supposed to do. Unfortunately, he was outgunned. He was supposed to watch the herd so that nobody could steal them. That
just to me seemed, maybe that was normal, right? But it seemed sad for James that he was left all by himself, and then he obviously got murderized.
Yeah, that was sad because he looked like a sweet kid. He was so young.
He was only 18.
That's right. So then we meet Chihuahua, and I was a little confused by Chihuahua's character.
Yeah.
Because when we meet her, she's standing near Wyatt Earp while he's playing poker, and I believe she's trying to help somebody else. She's trying to help him cheat.
Yeah, she's looking at Wyatt's cards.
She's telling him his cards. But it seems to me like she's trying to get his attention in trying to woo him kind of way. And maybe because she was one of the parlor girls, that was her job. But then we find out later that she is somewhat betrothed, or at least has a liken to Doc Holliday.
Do you think it's like elementary school where you punch the person you like to get their attention, even though it's kind of a dumb way to do it? I don't know. What I wondered, which I didn't catch, but was she trying to help the other guy cheat Wyatt for Doc Holliday? Were they all in cahoots? I don't know.
Because he was not in the saloon at this time.
He wasn't. He was coming later.
And so Wyatt catches her cheating, and he takes her outside and handles her like they probably handled a lot of women, especially women of the saloon. He tells her to knock it off. She slaps him, so he dunks her in the water trough.
Right. I just want to bring up that she started the violence in this case, but I think
except for he kind of manhanded her.
Oh, he totally did. But I think that too was kind of whitewashed, because I suspect at that time he probably would have just backhanded her in the saloon and nobody would have blinked.
No, you're totally right. Especially, I feel like there was a hierarchy and maybe he wouldn't treat Clementine that way.
Oh, no.
But a saloon girl probably was treated worse than...
She had lower rights or something. Yeah.
So that is, I guess, somewhat entertaining. Not to see a woman, but it's kind of playful, I guess. Because he didn't backhand her. He stuck her in the water trough.
Right, which is, that's not like horrible.
Oh, yeah.
But I thought she was going to get a spanking. So the water trough is less physically violent.
I thought she was too. So then Doc Holliday comes into the saloon and he's got eyes on Wyatt. And I thought it was funny because he takes him down to the end of the bar and he orders a champagne, which is not the drink I would have picked for Doc Holliday. And so Wyatt says, make it a whiskey. And Doc Holliday responds with, make it champagne. And so they drink champagne.
Right. Well, I don't know if they were trying to show that Doc Holliday didn't really fit in there. He was a highfalutin guy. And didn't he quote Shakespeare from Hamlet at some point?
Yes, he did. Later, when the actor from the theater comes in.
So I want to be fair that they also were culturally insensitive to the English, because that guy was very much the stereotypical drunken English actor.
Yeah. We probably shouldn't worry about calling all that out because we'll be here all day. But needless
Yeah.
to say. I mean, not only was it the West, it was portraying 1882, but then it was filmed in 1942. So
Right.
we cannot put our 2022
No,
goggles
I
on
more
when we
meant
watch this.
that it was pretty broadly drawn, right? Which is consistent with Westerns, right? They're generally not.
Right. So Doc is talking to Wyatt, and he at one point grabs his handkerchief and coughs. And the way he does it, it's this very, I don't know how to explain it, but to me, whenever I see it in films, depending on the era, it pretty much calls out, oh, they have tuberculosis. Or, you know, if it's a 1980s film, oh, they have like maybe AIDS or something. Like,
Right.
It just seems like there's this motion that people do, and maybe it's the fact that they're grabbing a handkerchief. So, or I guess depending on the era and depending on it could be like lung cancer or something, but it's done in this way that it's more serious than just like, oh, Doc has the sniffles.
I'll have to ask Katie if they covered tuberculic cough in acting classes.
Am I wrong? Do you agree?
I totally agree. And I thought, when you went down that road, I thought it was because of how well Val Kilmer did it. But now that you mention it, you're right. There's something that they do that lets us as the audience know, oh, this is not a normal cough.
Right.
This is a terminally ill cough.
Yeah, it's serious. So we know Doc is ill.
Yes, he is ill. And I don't know if maybe in person on set they did a little something, but you really didn't catch a pallor with him. He didn't look like sickly. His skin tone to me, he looked pretty healthy with the exception of we now knew that he had this cough that he was trying to hide.
I felt like there was something later in the film though, like maybe it's like he's sweaty that isn't in tune with like.
Yeah, he was kind of sweaty at one point.
So it just seemed like feverish. So it just seemed like he was ill. Like he wasn't, like he was a little stumbly. He wasn't your rogue cowboy.
Right. But they obviously all feared him.
Oh, very much so. He had a reputation just like the Earp brothers, and
now from a writing perspective, I was a little confused because when he first meets Wyatt Earp, there's like some tense moment and get him a gun and I don't have a gun. Why were they about to shoot each other? I didn't understand that.
I think if I remember from the film, well, I mean, they're two well-known cowboys. And so I think there was this, I mean, I've seen it in other Westerns where, you know, it's kind of like, I got to show you that I'm going to show you I'm the badass here in this town. Nobody can mess with me. And if you're the marshal, you got to know that, you know, leave me alone. So I think it was just kind of like some machismo.
Sure.
But what I thought was hilarious is he was like, draw. And if you were going to draw, isn't the next thing shoot?
Well, this comes back to what I was saying is I think
Henry was awfully calm when he opened his vest and was just like, can't.
There was some substantial poetic license taken there. And this is also true with the final shootout. I believe that if you are in a deadly confrontation, you shoot first and give them a warning later. You wouldn't say draw. You would just shoot the guy and be done.
So maybe that's how, because Wyatt was very calm.
Yeah, it maybe was one of these things where it's supposed to show that they only respect each other once they have established they're both badass tough guys. But right. I was confused.
Yeah. And so Wyatt is he's now the marshal of Tombstone. And so he's going to watch out for, and then Miss Clementine comes on the stagecoach and he takes a liking to her pretty quick.
I gotta say, Kathy Downs, the actress who played Clementine, was very attractive. The camera liked her. That was believable.
And there's a little bit of some jealousy because we find out that she was a nurse under Doc Holliday. And so now Chihuahua is very jealous of Clementine and is not happy that she's there and cannot wait for her to leave.
Beat it.
And there's a scene where Doc Holliday is telling Clementine to leave. And I think it's because I think he knows he's sick and he knows that if she finds out, she'll stay. And so he's like, just go back home. And as he's telling her to go back home, he does the second of grabbing his handkerchief and coughing. And so I think as a nurse, she would know, and I think she even stops and kind of gives a knowing, oh, he's sick.
That's the old Yeller thing where you got to drive them off because you really love them.
Right. And there's a great shot that we loved. He goes back into his room and he stares at his diplomas. And at first, it's kind of not quite a profile shot, but maybe a 45-degree angle between the flat wall where the diploma is and him. And then they track and then they cut to where we're more over, like kind of almost standing behind him over his shoulder. And you see his reflection in the glass that's on the picture frame. And we loved that shot.
I did. Speaking of cinematography, that raises an interesting point. I had to look this up, but when I saw the film, my first instinct was, this is a square image. And I looked it up, and it was an 11:8 image, which is not quite the standard 3:2 for television back in the era. It was really square, almost square. I mean, it wasn't, but it was, this aspect ratio was very different. And I don't know if you read anything why that was. I just noticed that immediately when watching the film.
So there's the scene where, that I was referencing earlier, the mayor is telling them about the new church that's being built. And so this is kind of one of those things that Tombstone, you have the saloon and you have the mercantile. But then when a church becomes built, that's when now the town is going to start developing and people will start settling around it. And then if you have, religion and probably if you could get a steady marshal, then order will start to be contained in this town. And so they're very proud of the new church that's being built. So everybody goes down and there's this dramatic scene, and I can link it in the show notes. I'll link the scene on YouTube where Wyatt Earp walks Clementine through the town. And it's very much, he's got his arm out and she's holding his arm. And it's very reminiscent of the wedding, kind of like the walk that the bride would take with traditionally her father, but sometimes it's the groom to the church. And then they have this dance scene. And it's one of those scenes that I think we spent, a good 20, 25 minutes talking about in film school.
The dance scene?
Yeah.
Wow. His dancing isn't that good.
There's a lot of iconography with the flags and the townspeople and kind of just his way of dancing. And there's a lot of symbolism.
Yeah, my note was certainly in 1882, there was someone who didn't like dancing because the town seems to be obsessed with it. I thought it was like Step Up 3, the Clementine years. It was amazing.
I loved it. One of the Earp brothers catcalls Chihuahua, and she's got like a pitcher of water, and it's probably like, when you wash your hands or whatever, and they didn't have plumbing. So she was taking the dirty water pitcher out because it's kind of a little foamy and frothy, and she throws it on him. I enjoyed that.
Right. She's lucky she didn't get a spanking.
So Chihuahua goes to Doc to tell him I think maybe that she loves him and maybe to chase off Clementine. And that's when he tells her that he's dying. And Clementine is checking out of the hotel. And Wyatt asks her why she's leaving. And he tries to talk her out of leaving. And she's like, you can't. And then I thought it was funny because he starts whistling, "Oh, my darling Clementine."
I thought the IMDb trivia said this movie was a little bit unique in period westerns in that it used songs that would have been accurate for that period as opposed to songs that would be accurate for when it was produced.
Right. So then Doc leaves town and he leaves town on the stagecoach and he throws a bag of money towards Chihuahua and he's like riding out of town. So she goes and finds Wyatt and and that's when Wyatt sees the cross around Chihuahua's neck. And so he thinks that Doc killed James. But then in talking to Chihuahua, did they find the Clanton brother with Chihuahua? And that's how they realized that, no, in fact, it wasn't Doc, it was the Clantons.
Right. And there's a scene where Wyatt confronts Doc Holliday, and it is, in my recollection, the first time one of the many tropes that John Ford invented happens where Wyatt shoots the gun out of Doc Holliday's hand, which is very difficult to do without actually shooting the guy.
Shooting their hand.
Or shooting, because if you shoot the gun, it can ricochet into their torso and kill them. And that's one thing this film does very well. is when a person gets shot, even one time, they fall down and generally don't get up and often die.
Right.
Which is very realistic. And
Right.
there's like, this is how Chihuahua meets her fate.
I was just going to say, I was going to have you talk about that because you mentioned that when we were watching it. So right after they find out that Billy Clanton is responsible for James's death, he shoots Chihuahua. And you were talking about that.
Right. He shoots Chihuahua to get rid of the witness, which is ridiculous since her confession had been heard. It didn't do anything. It was just spiteful. But Doc has to perform surgery, and he is a trained physician, so he's, reasonably qualified for that era. And he tells her that he doesn't have anything to numb the pain, which in a saloon, maybe they could have found something, but anyway. And he operates on her, and she dies, right?
Yeah.
All she's given is a scarf to bite down on for the pain, which is amazing. And so the actress does a good job of being stoic when she's in theory being operated on. But
she does let out a scream, though.
At one point, but I thought she did a good job of stoicism. I would be screaming immediately. But my point is, gunshot wounds to the torso are often fatal without really serious intervention, and you just didn't have it at that time.
Mm-hmm.
So when we have these gun battles, and people now, we expect them a la John Rambo to grit their teeth and keep moving. That's not actually accurate. Most people fall down when you put a hole in them.
Mm-hmm. So the first time I saw this, I thought it was, I'm sure this happened in the West, but I was just like, what a waste. So Virgil Earp goes out to the Clantons to try to find Billy, who just shot Chihuahua, and he walks into the house of the enemy. And I was like, okay, first of all, you're an idiot because you put your back to two of the Clanton brothers, and he walks in to ask where Billy is, and Pa just shoots him.
Which I think is realistic.
I think it's very realistic. That's why I wouldn't have gone in the house.
Right. They're bad guys.
So a Clanton shoots an Earp, James, then they shoot Virgil, and so then that creates the need for the shootout at the OK Corral, because now Wyatt's got to go avenge James and Virgil's murder.
Right.
So what did you think of the shootout at the OK Corral?
I thought it was relatively realistic for a Hollywood film. A couple of things that stuck out to me. One is one of the characters, I think it was the Earp played by Ward Bond, but I could be wrong. He takes his boots off, and that's because boots are loud. So he was in his stocking feet as he snuck up on them. And there was not a lot of shots fired, and people like Doc Holliday get shot once and he's dead. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
There's no gritting teeth and dragging himself back into the fight. And he took somebody with him. So I thought that part was fairly realistic. And then at the end, we had a bit of, again, stereotypical cliche Western where Wyatt Earp tells old man Clanton, like, okay, I've killed off the rest of your family, but your cattle rustling and murdering is now waved away somehow. And I said to you out loud, wouldn't he just shoot him? And sure enough, Clanton gets on a horse, he rides a few feet, turns around, and tries to shoot everybody and gets shot himself. Which, again, I thought was, again, relatively realistic that he would, without warning, just try to shoot his opponents. So I thought for a Hollywood Western, it was remarkably low on the number of shots fired and realistic, relatively speaking.
Right. And then the movie kind of just abruptly ends because after that, Clementine pretty much says, okay, I'm heading out now that everybody's dead.
Yeah, everybody's dead.
And I wanted Wyatt to say no. Either come with me, let's settle in California, or let me go back to where you are, or and nothing. He was just like, all right, see you later.
Well, I believe he had to go see Big Nose Kate. I love that name.
So one thing I want to mention that I try to pay attention when we watch these films is sound. And at the very beginning, we both were kind of chuckling because there was a whip crack and then the music cue, bum, bum, bum. And you were like, oh my gosh. And then during the shootout at the OK Corral, well, no, before I say that, in the saloon, we were cracking up because something would happen. Somebody would do something, somebody would say something, and everything would stop. Everyone would freeze and it would get bone quiet and they would watch the interaction. And then you mentioned at one point, like somebody would go like, knock it off or whatever. It would like the little tumult would end. and the band was ready to go, and the music would start, and everybody would just go back to their drinking and talking and poker playing. And it was just so funny. It was almost like, remember, what was the game we'd play as kids, and you'd turn the light on and you turn the light?
Like freeze tag
right.
kind of.
It was just like everybody was playing freeze tag or something. And then during the shootout, I noticed that there were moments of just at the very beginning of the fight where it was absolutely quiet, which of course increases the intensity. It increases the suspense when we have there's no like references. And so we're just seeing people creeping around. And then then the effects, the special effects and the sound effects would intensify and increase. And then of course it was bang, 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 bang.
But you mentioned increasing the tension. This is one area that I think we see in several films, including one we saw in the theater recently, where in reality, if you're trying to sneak up on an armed enemy, you do so really slowly, right? I mean, super duper slow, because you're trying not to get detected. But as a viewer, there's only so much of that we can put up with. So they kind of have to move things along. And I think that silence helps build the tension when you still only have, like, let's say 2 minutes to get, Chris Pratt into the enemy base or whatever. There is a limit, I'm sure, on what the viewers can sit through. So that silence is a great way, I think, to build that tension.
Yeah, totally. So you mentioned a head trauma. Was there another one?
I actually had no noted head traumas. I think, I'm going to say that I think Indian Charlie got some head trauma. We maybe could give a point for when he's dragged down the stairs by his feet, so his head bumps, but that's about it.
Yes. And did we get a Clementine Earp smooch?
Smoochy, smoochy, smoochy.
I have no recorded smoochy.
And I don't think Chihuahua got to smooch anybody.
No, I don't think so.
Oh, no smoochies. And now it was only stagecoaches, but do you have a driving review?
I don't really have a driving review, even though they were stagecoaches.
Yeah, the stagecoach would just kind of come into town and then it would leave town. So it wasn't super.
In this case.
Yes. Should we go to the numbers?
Let's go to the numbers.
Okay. So this film came out in 1946. Like we said, the budget was $2 million, which to me sounds like a lot.
That does sound
especially
like a lot of money.
Considering
$46.
next week's film.
Yeah.
And what they spent. So, like I said, it passed the ratings board. It's considered a drama, romance, Western. We paused, 3 times. Once to talk about the word that you used willy-nilly at a time. And then 2 other times to talk trivia. There's no domestic data for how much money this movie made, but it's listed that it made $15,000 in France.
Well,
so
there you go.
I don't know if that was the international hub, and so that's why that's there, but that's what I found. It got a 7.8 on IMDb, and on Rotten Tomatoes, the critics gave it 100%. So the critics love this movie, and audiences do too at 86%. I would say I like this movie.
I like this movie. I liked it less than I thought I was going to. It was okay, but I thought I would enjoy it more.
Right. Hey, everybody, we thought we'd take the opportunity. We've been checking out some movies in the theater, which has been delightful, I must say. And we thought we'd give you a little kind of our take on them, just a little quick snippet. So Mike's going to tell you about Death on a Nile.
This is another film by Kenneth Branagh. And if you liked his Murder on the Orient Express, you will like this film. A note that it is not that accurate relative to the original Agatha Christie novel.
Okay. And then last Sunday, we went and saw Dog, and I posted it on my personal social media, but I want to say that we liked it. It's a cute movie. It's actually, I would say it's a family movie. It does have some feels, but we use a website called doesthedogdie.com. True website. We've used it many times because we are dog people and we cannot watch a movie if the dog dies. It's just a no-go for us. So we checked it out on the website. The website said the dog lives. The dog does live. And it's a cute movie. So we enjoyed it. So that is it for this week. Hey, if you want to give me a call at 971-245-4148 and give us feedback, reviews, comments, questions, ask about this month's movies, whatever you want to do, or you can email me at Christy@DodgeMediaProductions.com. and shoot me questions, comments, concerns, reviews, whatever you want to do. That will do it. Listen up next week when we are going to be talking about the 1952 classic High Noon. Big, big movie. So never forget.
Dodges never stop, and neither do the movies.
Thanks for listening to Dodge Movie Podcast with Christy and Mike Dodge of Dodge Media Productions. To find out more about this podcast and what we do, go to dodgemediaproductions.com. Subscribe, share, leave a comment, and tell us what we should watch next. Dodges never stop, and neither do the movies.